When you tour around California, Washington, and New York, you see gorgeous suburbs, beautiful state-of-the-art buildings, and a thriving workforce with a respectable income average. What you don't see, however, is America's rotting underbelly and the poor state of affairs in so many states in America, which seems to only be getting worse. Schools and hospitals are shutting down, and so many rural towns are emptying out. Today, we're going to be looking at the poorest states in America and their constant battle for survival. Poverty in the United States is measured by income thresholds, which are in turn determined by a consumer price index. For a person living alone, the threshold stands at about $13,500 per year. For each additional member of a household, the threshold moves up by $4,720. This means the threshold for a family of 4 would be $27,750. A minimum wage worker earning $7.50 an hour would bring in $15,000 per year, putting them just narrowly above the poverty line in nothing other than technicality. The issue can arise due to certain things like unemployment, underemployment, education, and of course, systematic negligence from the federal government. Who would have guessed? More than 14% of Americans live in poverty. That totals about 50 million people, nearly 1 out of every 9 Americans, including 1 out of 8 children. Close to 50 million people in the U.S. cannot afford basic necessities, and more than 1 million public school kids are homeless. A further 2 million Americans don't even have access to running water, which are probably the same subset of people who are homeless anyway. Poverty is a major problem in some states more than others, especially in the majority of states that makes up the Southern Belt. Georgia, for one, sees more than 14% of its population live below the poverty line, and although the average household income stands at a semi-healthy $66,500, the condition of the state's healthcare and economy leaves much to be desired. The high poverty rate also means Georgia has a higher-than-average crime rate, over 400 incidents per 100,000 people, with most of that being burglaries and aggravated assaults. Those numbers are extremely similar to South Carolina's, where more than 160,000 violent and property crimes are recorded annually. And surprise, South Carolina's 13.8% poverty rate is also similar to Georgia's numbers, except for the fact that South Carolina's average household income of $59,000 is a lot less than Georgia's $66,500. But just like Georgia, South Carolina has one of the worst healthcare systems in the country. Oklahoma, on the other hand, is slightly worse than both those states, with an average household income of just under $56,000 and a poverty rate of 14.3%. Oklahoma ranks 46th for child welfare and 49th for education. Crime is also up in Oklahoma. The state ranks 6th for property crimes. Seems poverty and crime rates go together often, huh? Both Alabama and Kentucky have a 14.9% poverty rate, with a $54,000 average household income for Alabama and $55,500 for Kentucky, leaving Alabama slightly worse off. Kentucky buckles the crime rate trend, as both the property and violent crime stats rank among the best in the nation. Alabama, on the other hand, is a completely different yet predictable story. Property crime grew to 25.9 incidents per 1,000 residents, and violent crime to 6.0 per the same. Alabama violent crime rates sits ugly as one of the top 5 in the nation. You know who else sits in the top 5 for crime? Arkansas. Arkansas is far and away the #1 state in all of the U.S. for violent crimes, with 7.1 incidents per 1,000 people after a steady 6% rise year after year. Property crime also stands at 26.5 incidents per 1K people, placing it firmly 5th nationwide. It's no surprise when you take into consideration that 15.2% of the entire state's population lives in poverty, with an average household income of just $52,500. West Virginia is even poorer, with 15.8% of its population living in poverty, and an average household income of just over $51,000. The state's crime rate is fairly healthy, but the healthcare sector itself isn't, ranked 47th in the nation. West Virginia is one of the very few poor states not located in the South. New Mexico, however, is located in the South and ranks as the 3rd poorest state in the U.S., with a whopping 16.8% of the population living below the poverty line on an average household income of almost $54,000. The poverty rate is exaggerated by the fact that 9.2% of the entire population are immigrants. New Mexico also ranks third on the most dangerous and crime-filled state in America. Has to be a coincidence, right? What's not a coincidence in any case is Louisiana being the second poorest state in the U.S. They boast a poverty rate 17.8% and the average household income stands at $52,000. Louisiana ranks fourth for property crime and third for violent crime nationwide. They rank 46th in the health sector, but they're nowhere near as desperate and disconnected as the #1 poorest state in the U.S. Mississippi, the former catfish capital of the world, is a special case of poverty. Mississippi has a poverty rate of 18.7%, an almost 1% increase from Louisiana in second. They're also the only state in the U.S. with an average household income less than $50,000. Mississippi is often called the most southern place on earth, and that applies to all the negative metrics we've been using so far in this video, year in, year out. They consistently rank as the worst state in terms of healthcare, education, revenue, employment, and population. The only good thing about Mississippi is the falling crime rate, and even that is as a result of people pouring out of the state in search of better opportunities. So there's either no one to rob or no one to do the robbing. About 20% of the state population is on welfare, which is double the U.S. average. That's despite the fact that the state of Mississippi sends back hundreds of millions of dollars in welfare and rental assistance money from Washington, because the governor sees it as liberal handouts that'll encourage his citizens to stay out of the workforce, the basically non-existent workforce, that is. All in all, Mississippi, just like a lot of other states, are suffering from an increasing level of poverty. And as a result, a lot of insecurity have seeped into the lives of Americans. And it's not as simple as a poor state problem. Even the big boys and wealthy states are witnesses one crisis or another, be it the migrant crisis in New York or the theft crisis in California. In California, 14 of the 15 largest counties have seen a substantial uptick in commercial burglaries. 9 of the 15 saw an increase in commercial robberies, and 10 of the 15 recorded notable increases in shoplifting. It's also no surprise given the amount of homeless people in California. Cali alone holds about 25% of the entire nation's homeless population. California's crime rate also increased by just over 6% from 2021 to 2022. And with all the shoplifting going around, that's certainly not dropping in 2023, is it? All in all, the American dream is in serious trouble. Wages are going up, but taxes, housing costs, inflation, and immigration are growing to meet and overtake it. In addition to the 50 million Americans in poverty, about 108 million more people are stuck in a limbo in between poverty and security, earning around $55,000 annually. And given all the troubles a worker faces in current day, it's far more likely to fall into poverty than it is to rise into security. If you're enjoying the video so far, or you know more about the American poverty struggle, then leave us a comment with your thoughts. As Matthew Desmond, a Princeton professor of sociology, put it, poverty is by design, and a certain majority of Americans takes advantage of a system that carelessly exploits the poor. The bottom-earning citizens in America pay over $11 billion in overdraft fees, $1.6 billion in check cashing fees, and $10 billion in payday loan fees every year. If you do the math, that's quite literally $61 million from the pockets of the poor every single day. After all, only about 9% of bank customers pay 84% of bank overdraft fees. The system as it is either keeps the gap between the rich and poor exactly where it is, or widens it further. So, what can the government do about it? Well, deeper investments into fighting poverty and a clear source of funds would go a long way, as well as better implementation of means-tested programs. But even that won't help a state like Mississippi, who refuses aid. A clear source of funds would already be available if the top 1% earners in America didn't evade taxes. According to available data, if the super-rich folks paid their accurate taxes, then the U.S. would automatically find themselves with an extra $175 billion, which is almost enough on its own to bring every citizen above the poverty line. More needs to be done in order to bridge the gap between the top and bottom earners if America is avoiding implosion. The workers' interest needs more protection, or else even more states will fall into poverty.